testifying that women can't be leaders. And there are different quota systems. In some countries, it's quota systems is part of a broader affirmative action system. So there are different mechanisms that are used as affirmative actions. And in some countries, I think in the present day, when we look at countries in the Nordic region, around Sweden and others, they've actually moved to say that there should be 50% representation of women and 50% representation of the other genders, of course including recognizing the other individual minorities and key populations. The idea really is to say the journey to dismantling patriarchy is very long. It will take years, but before that really happens, we need to include women in decision-making processes, governance, and democratic processes. So when we are looking at quotas, we are not simply looking at it from a point of view to say women should actually just go and contest. I think Zimbabwe was doing very well before the quotas. Women were trying so hard. I think in 2013, we had 33% representation of women. I know it was about 30%, but they were contesting in highly politically charged. The sexual violence that happens in political parties in the broader space, I think is very well documented. And going into 2013 now, as we were going through the constitutional reform process, women actually came together in their diversity. I was a student, and then I transitioned into the Institute for Young Women Development at the time, when the GNU started, 2008 to 2009. And I remember being part of a very vibrant women's movement that was advocating for the equal representation of women to be included in the Constitution. The Women's Coalition led what was called a G20, Group of 20, where there were key influential women, including Joyce Muturi at the time. I think the Sekai Bolans of this world were there representing the movement for democratic change. There were Priscilla Misi Hairambis, women coming from all political backgrounds, and women coming also from civil society in different sectors. And they demanded 50% representation. But unfortunately, because we live in this patriarchal society, the political parties, led by their co-chairs at the time, actually ended up settling for 66. And I personally remember asking Douglas Monzora and Paul Mangwana in one panel discussion at how they had come up with the 60 and the additional 60. And luckily it was in the presence of Priscilla Misiarambi. And the men could not explain how. There was no formula. And then Priscilla explained to say, look, we actually demanded 50%. But these men, when they went and negotiated inside, behind closed doors, they came with a random figure and literally said, Priscilla, this cannot be done. It's not possible. So what we are seeing is patriarchy at play. And even now, as we are talking about this amendment, it's not about the women. It's about patriarchy. So I hope this helps us to debunk the idea that quotas are bad, that affirmative action is bad, but that we need to have affirmative action until such a time society naturally recognizes the important role of women and votes for women into offices, appoint women into key offices. And then secondly, coming from the Institute for Young Women Development, I think I wouldn't have done justice to leave this panel discussion without talking about it. Having been founded in 2009, the idea was never for us to fight the older generation of women. The idea was to recognize the work, the gains that have been made, and say, how do we build upon this? Because if it hadn't been for the Margaret Long Wars and all those women who went to war, surely there would not be any space for us to talk about gender equality and young women inclusion. Because no one would have talked women's rights. No one would have fought for women's rights. So the idea really is just for young women to be able to build on the gains that their senior sisters have made and continue to push for the various issues that continue to affect our society. So I think from where we sit in the Institute for Young Women Development and all the young women groups we've affiliated with, I know that the fight is not that we want to displace the women who are currently occupying positions. The fight is to say there are very few women, and we need to increase that number. And as we increase that number, recognize the need for us to be able to pass on the baton stick to each other, so that we have this intergenerational passage of leadership. You know, in Shona they say, there's a proverb that says, "Ushema zoro unorawanwa," you know? And I think that has got its roots in our Zimbabwe context, and I know certainly from what I heard Margaret and Monica Mchangwa exchanging, these women definitely appreciate and recognize that. So I wanted to debunk this notion that young women are fighting to remove and replace the older women who are currently in parliament. Certainly the quota system that we have, which is 60 seats with no mathematical formula. Secondly, 60 seats that are additional in itself is a makeup of a patriarchal system, because the men didn't want to include the women within the mainstream 210 seats. They decided to add. So the women then become the budget, the baggage, you know, to the citizens in terms of the fiscal cost. So you see, all these things are actually part of a patriarchal system. And I think our conversation from now, as we go forward and wind down around this with Sismagi, as well as with Councillor Resta, and also the voices that we're going to hear from Tatenda in her absence, is to say the reality is that we currently have this quota system of 66, which is very limited quantitatively, probably, which we are not happy with in terms of how the women are represented. In council, we're also going to have 30%, again, not what we wanted. All this is against the dictates of Section 56, which talks about gender equality and non-discrimination. But that being the case, Sister Margaret, you are no longer in a political party, but you have been in a political party and you've started a political party of your own. How should the women who are in leadership in political parties and the women who are in leadership in government, how should they position themselves to influence how power operates within that realm, so that going to 2023 and going beyond the 10 years that the extension of the quota is going to give us, and going towards that gender equality bill, that gender equality law that we want to see, this transitional period allows for the creation of an environment that shifts how people see women and ensure that eventually people are able to naturalize the leadership role of women and be able to vote for them, to appoint them, and to actually respect that women can actually deliver. Over to you, Sister Margaret.
Let me acknowledge once again the role that you have played, Gillian Iglanis. You know, I've been with you for some years now. You know, debate is around the same thing. You know, how can we achieve, you know, in women, many women or a big number of women in decision-making position. But I want to say to you, it's also still counterproductive. I think you listened when I was actually talking to the minister. She's very fair and firm. You know, when she mentioned the statement, we can't be begging until now. Even though there are certain things that you can read between the lines, because there are certain things that she cannot say open, but they've been covered by one word. We can't be begging by now. Do we need that quota system? We don't need it. It's counterproductive. I'm going to explain how it is counterproductive. For as long as we have a political party system, for as long as we've got a political party system, we don't have control of it. Because it's controlled by the structures. This is why you find in terms of the caliber of women who go through the quota system, it's not a decision by the majority. Majority comes in when you are voting, but you are voting for a political party. You see? So that alone is undermining the capacity of women to drive a change. So what I want to say, instead of fighting a quota system, I know as NGOs, why don't you come together? It's true, because after 2023, if you look now, we have got the least women compared to all other from 1980, 1990 when I was in parliament. We had a very good number of women parliamentarians. And if you look now, it's going down. So we are saying 2023, mark my words, 2023, few of them will make it, will remain with the 60 and a few others. Why? Because they will always say, you have the 60 that you claimed for. Why do you want some more seats? And with our people, it's going to be even worse. Because it's at that time you're going to get about my community grassroots. Because they know the language to speak to them. So 2023 is going to be horrible. Because the succeed, I'm not succeed, it's counterproductive. I think we should begin, because time is still there. Laws are put in for people. They are put in to guide people. That law can also be amended. Let's have the gender equality bill 50-50 by 2023. Then we know we are secured. So as far as the quota system is concerned, I'm still of the same position for years. Even Chilo, when I'm speaking, the two of us will agree. And I'm of the opinion, 45 years. 45 years is not a joke. Don't forget again, Jillian, there is something that is not been quoted. 30 years after independence, I'm the one to repeal the act that did allow women to sign documents for their kids. And to sacrifice my kids, my son, as an integrate. So if we keep on prolonging issues, we won't get anywhere. And I want the youth to take the challenge, claim their space. In India, I was youth, that's why I'm saying this is possible. 1980, I was 18. When I got into parliament, I was 20. So why can't you? That's why I'm here, to give you the courage to say it's possible. Even these guys who are mature, what she says, if they don't want, just get there. And I did it. 1995 for the people, and that's not a voice, but because of the courage, I said, okay, because they will say tomorrow, if they give, like this was a Mapua 10%, when it's the other side, silver plate, and it is nothing. That 10, you don't accept it. Mapua silver plate, but that's 10%, what does it mean? What does it entail in terms of changing the entire system? Apana. So I know the message that I have for the youth, the word aspiring. Aspiring, what motivated you to aspire for something? Politics is not about aspiring. Aspiring candidates. There has to be something to show off that will accompany. Please listen to me. There has to be something that will accompany your dreams. And if you look at, I'll give my example. I've always repeated, I never thought I would be a member of parliament at that age. And I never wanted to be one. But because of the First Lady, Anna Rutechinamano, and these women who cited me and said they to plead with me, Kuti, can you be a member of parliament? Can you go and campaign? I gave conditions. That my voice is still small. I cannot be able to address the whole. I will tell you from day one, I addressed with the First Lady until I won the elections. Because I said to you, asked me to get in, and I'm telling the truth, my voice is, And she would go, she first speak. No, you know, Margaret is very intelligent, she's clever, she's a freedom fighter, she's this. She does the address for the first 30 minutes, and she gives me the 10 minutes. So I'm saying, have a look. You plant a flower, pasa. To those aspiring. You must make a dent. It must be a passion. You must know I'm saying it to youth. That's what you need to do. You must have results. You must produce results. I want to be on the platform. You aspiring members of parliament. What have you done which requires you or which deserves you to be one of the members? Like, it's not a recruiting procedure. You might recruit the wrong person who will never get there. Donald also like it is a waste of money. Puts his money where the mouth is. At least we must be able to know the church no diwa. Tisatitashika ukoko. And I'm telling you, church no diwa. Tisatitashika udakuita council. Church no diwa. Tisatitashika udakuita MP. So I think here nyaye ngatinya so inzwisisa. Tobata siyana nyaye kumbo bega every time. And I don't want to be big. In any case, I've never been a beggar. I'm proud of that. Even Balarat Zimbabwe, I'm expelled. I went independent. I was not a beggar. When I formed my own political party, I was not a beggar. And even now, one thing that I want to warn you, youth, don't make politics business. When I move from one political party to another political party, I love for politics. And because you must be principled. If you're a woman fighter, you can fight it with what you are. Why do you have to move from one political party to another? Are you in business? No, it's about passion. So youth, be principled. If you want to get there, you must start with a foundation that is firm. To say, this is what I want to be. I'm Namatai, I believe in this, and I'm going to pursue that.
Thank you very much, Sister Margaret. We are moving to Councillor Resta. How should the women in political parties and those in leadership strategically influence themselves, position themselves so that they influence those parties, they influence government structures to make sure that we set the conditions that are good for women to be able to proudly stand for elections and can also appoint women as leaders?
All right, good afternoon once again. I don't want to draw much on the quota system at National Assembly, but I want to rush to the 30%, which we call a critical mass at local level. I think we as women councillors, the issue of 30% critical mass at local government, it's our own issue. It's us as women councillors countrywide who came up with this idea, and we brought this idea from the section 124, which talks about the quota system at national level. Because we have noted it's contained that there is a big decline at national level for the past elections, especially from 2013 to 2018 election. It moves on from 34% to 31%. And we realized that only 1% were women got through the first past the post, and the 30% or the majority got in there because of the quota system. So with that said, what if there is no quota system? Maybe there is nothing we will be recorded. So for the local authorities, we see it as a milestone. We see it as the greatest achievement, because we are saying that come 2023, we have already 30% of women councillors. This is a strategy of increasing women in local councils or in local government, plus those who are going to contest using the first past the post, because we have been in this system already before this quota system. Bear in mind that patriarchy, as she rightfully said before, is our major culprit in our societies. Let me unpack it. We have political affiliations. It is very difficult for you to contest if you are coming for a political party which is not supported by the people of that area. I am talking from the background of the rural setup. Kumamisha, kwakati siyani nekuma urban areas. You really know kuti kumamisha kune party inonzi ishi ndo yatinomhanya nayo. Kune imwe area kune imwe party inonzi iyi ndiyatinomhanya nayo. So if you came to a different political party as a woman, at times it will be very difficult for you to contest. And also, the issue of finance is a big deal, especially during the campaigning times. If you don't have anything in your pockets, truly speaking, it's very difficult for you to get there. Because uchikoshika pawashika, unenge wakutonzi muri pachi, mayuta nenge achidadoro, vanenge kuri kasvika pane namwe vanenge vachida kuhova mari yekofi nechi, which is different from a male counterpart. Anongoburitsa mari yaabva naye kumbeyo yanongoburitsa without begging, without consulting. But you as a woman, you can't do that. Also, cultural and religious beliefs, they also hinder a woman's participation in political and decision making. It's the way we were brought. Zvinhu zvatakazvarwa tikangokurawo zviriko kungonzi vanotungamirira varume. So bearing that mind, we as women, we lack confidence because of fear. Varume vacho vanenge kuti isu, we are the custodians of these positions. It's ours, which is difficult for us. So we are saying the issue of quota system is already passed. And we won't dwell much on this thing. But moving on to 50-50 representation of moving on to gender parity, I think what is lacking is the enforcement and implementation of the legal framework. We have clear provisions in our constitution which talks about gender. For example, section 17, section 56, section 80, and other sections. But what is lacking is the enforcement and implementation of those laws. And because Zimbabwe is a signatory to regional and international conventions and targets, there is no way out. We can't meet the 50-50, although gender is a process. We can't achieve it overnight. So I think the other thing we need to do, being assistants with our partners, is to come up with the capacity building programs for the sitting councillors, sitting MPs, so that they will be capable for their duties, so that they will become role models in view of those men and women in the communities, including the young women, saying that, oh yes, women can do it. Look at Councillor Jinangoma. Look at Honorable Margaret. They are there. They are competing with their male counterparts. So there is room to add more women in these decision positions. And I'm sure we have to strengthen our lobbying and advocacy strategies. Yes, we do have them, but I think we have to strengthen them, so that women down there, including young women, will be well versed about their rights. Lastly, I think, if possible, there is need for amendment of the electoral law. Because the elections are being governed by ZEC. If we put it in this way, all political parties must submit their lists with the 50-50 representation of men and women. Failure to do that, the list must be rejected. I think it can help us. I know for the political parties it may be very difficult, but if it is a legal binding tool, it can help us. So in a nutshell, I'm saying the quota system, the first past the post, the 10 seats that were introduced to youth, these are the opportunities for the young women to get into political decision-making positions. Make use of these 3 different strategies. The 10 seats that we have offered, the quota system, and the first past the post system. I think I love the way that Honorable Margaret has said, let's engage the youth. Yeah, let's pull them up so that they know the road. And bear in mind that in semi-youth, it's not an issue because parallel position.
I'm going to interrupt you.
I'm just finishing. I'm just finishing. What is very important? Stand your grounds. Be visible. Show up yourself so that people will know you well. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. So what I like about this conversation is when we started with problem analysis, it seemed like it was a women problem, right? But as we moved towards the strategies, we're actually talking about the critical issues and demonstrating that the issue is not about intergenerational funds, but really about women being able to support each other across the generations. It's really about continuing our advocacy and our lobbying, and for those who are already in office, making sure that the unnecessary reforms, including on the electoral law, as well as being principled and really standing our grounds, so we don't cross flows of political parties just to look for opportunities. So before I invite perhaps just 2 questions from the audience, I want to play an audio clip of a conversation we had with Honorable Maletela, and unfortunately she couldn't be with us now, but because she represents a particular generation in this conversation, I think it's important for us to hear her views. So just a moment while I make sure I pick the right conversation. Thank you very much for your responses. I think it was quite elaborate. There's something I want to follow up on. Coming from the Institute for Young Women Development, where we are actually promoting the participation of young women in decision-making and politics, we don't see older women in power as our enemies. We actually recognize the fact that the problem is not that there are older women in positions of power, but the problem is that there is patriarchal dominance. And as we advocated for the implementation of Section 56 of the Constitution, our belief is that in addition to the women who are in Parliament, those who are all going to who have been there through especially the elected positions, we actually need to add on the number. Hence the need for us to be able to also bring in the women, the young women as additionals, because we do believe that what the Constitution has done with the extended quota, it has deliberately divided women, so that older women will think that they are being taught by younger women, and so that younger women think that their space is taken by the older women just because there is limited space for everyone. So in our view, the problem is not an intergenerational conflict, but we believe the problem problem is patriarchy. And as a woman leader, what do you have to say, both to the younger generation and to the older generation, to realize that their problem here is not the limited number of seats, but the problem is patriarchy that is actually rebranding and recalibrating itself to act as if it supports women, yet it does not, and wants to continue maintaining this divide so that the women will continue to be fighting against each other.
Yeah, this is a deliberate move. You need to understand and appreciate that what men wanted to do was to make sure that we don't concentrate on fighting them, but we concentrate on fighting each other, because what they've done is to instill some thought into young people that their space has been taken by older women. Yes, it's not true. The issue is that, like I said before, that the issue is that there are men who have taken up positions which are meant for women. So the issue is, I would like to say to a lot of young women, is that we need to be able to deal, to work together as we know, so that at least we can then become relevant. And then as women together, we then fight, have one force that we fight together. And not be so much centered on fights within each other. Patriarchy has been there, patriarchy has to be fought. And the reason and how we can fight it is by us uniting together, particularly a united front, so that we're able to fight it. Patriarchy has got to an extent of even calling women names that they're not. To an extent that whenever we have got a conversation that we want to be having concerning even politics, they will just ask away. Then the issue is, how can you determine leadership because of men? The issue is, we need to understand that these are sexist barriers that have been put in place, which then deter women from getting involved in politics. Even the name Quota, women's Quota. Quota will still exhibit a name which is just set there, and it's a quota of a full thing. You understand, Quota, we know what a quota is. The name itself, we need to make sure that this, I tried to do that in the Constitution Amendment, but I think we need a name so that we just put this people in place. So that whenever we are relating to any place, like the constituency, the quota MP, they need to see like there's another which is less, like if someone is superior and the other is not. Yes, they've got the same salary, they get the same benefits as MPs. So what we need to understand is that right now we've got this fight that we have. And women, the only thing a woman can be saying which will deter them from getting into politics is with our Zimbabwe. And at the end of the day, what are we saying? These are sexist barriers which are put in place. No one can be determined to be loyal. No one can be determined to someone who preserves their values, because I will grow by Itsika. Itsika is not put it but it's not supposed to be used against me. After all, I can't go to a CV. Someone has to then write the marital status. Who was that? That's a Western culture that we need to change. Because the moment you're talking about marital status single, someone is got something that they will say, why should we include that? That is social issues should not be detected to be coming into political issues, or should not be coming into professional issues. When we're talking about professionalism, what does social issues contribute in someone's well-being or being involved in the whole process? Because now, right now, we're working on politics, we're going to it's men who are creating all that so that they fight us. So I believe that these are some of the fights that we need to fight, and also we need to fight the issue of the name, and also we need to deal with the structural issues of women's quota. Women's quota, right now, in a challenge with constitution.
Right, that was the voice from Honorable Mabetela, and what I just cut there is where she was also even talking about how when it comes to the Constituency Development Fund, it's also very discriminatory to women in parliament, to women parliamentarians, because the Constituency Development Fund, by its name, goes to a constituency.
Yes.
And if all the men sitting on the constituency-based seats, if all the parliamentarians on the constituency-based seats are men, it means they're the ones who are actually going to control how the funds are going to be used. And even if you come from that particular region, you're not recognized as a woman parliamentarian, so that these men will say, let's negotiate and let's find out how we can collectively, as parliamentarians, utilize the CDF. So we see that the problem, as she rightly says, it's the structure of the quota. And I think we need to understand that while women really need to be represented, because I think from the sentiments, we all need to be represented. But while we are saying we need representation through certain mechanisms, the issue is not that the quota is the problem, but it's the structure that we then end up going with. And what determines the structure of the quota is the men wanting to preserve certain seats, and the man wanting to give women seats that make them look as if they are the bad ones. Because now we're saying, why extra 30 councillors when our roads are dilapidated, when there are no medicines in hospitals? So the problem is then, translated and taken to women. So I think that's what we need to understand, and as we think of the gender equality bill, these are the things that we should make sure are not replicated, because the bill can also risk being used as a tool against women's participation and our demands. Just to wrap up, I'm going to invite 2 quick reactions to the panelists, and then we close and move on to the next session.